Hey, welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got a really interesting set of sources today. It all starts with a Screen Rant piece looking at the most influential sci-fi shows from the 90s, the ones everyone still copies.
Right. And what's great is we also have all those reader comments you shared, so it's not just the article's take, it's the fan reactions too.
Exactly. People who are there watching these shows.
Hmm.
So our goal here is to really unpack this. Why these shows? What made them influential according to the article?
And how are their ideas still kicking around today? Plus, we got to dig into what the comments are saying, the agreements, the disagreements.
Yeah, the whole picture. The sources really paint the 90s as this kind of golden era for TV sci-fi.
Definitely. You had the whole Star Wars thing still looming large. CGI was finally getting, cheaper for TV budgets.
And new networks.
Yeah.
Like Fox and UPN, they were getting into the game. And of course, the Sci-Fi channel, which is Sci-Fi now, launched back then too.
It was like a perfect storm for the genre. And the article argues these 6 shows really defined that moment and, well, shaped what came after.
Okay, so let's jump in. Let's see what these sources highlight, starting with the first one on their list.
First up is Sliders, ran from 95 to 2000.
Ah, Sliders. Yeah, the premise. Young guy, Quinn Mallory, builds a gadget to slide into parallel universes. It feels almost, I don't know, simple now.
Yeah, compared to the MCU. But the article makes a point. This was long before the multiverse was the staple it is today. It really put that idea out there for a mass audience.
So what was the original idea behind it? The source says on Fox it was actually trying to do social commentary.
Right, using those different worlds to hold up a mirror, putting characters in situations where everything was flipped to make you think about our own world.
A classic sci-fi move. But the article notes it kind of lost steam. It moved to the Sci-Fi channel later on.
Yeah, and Jerry O'Connell, the lead, left around then. The sources say the initial excitement faded.
And that matches up with one of the comments you sent over. Someone saying they liked it at first, but felt it crashed and burned on Sci-Fi.
Mm-hmm. They mentioned rumors that a lot of the writers quit and their replacements just ruined it. You hear that sometimes. Behind-the-scenes stuff really impacts the final product.
Sounds like that viewer definitely felt a quality drop. But even with that later dip, the article still argues it was super influential.
Its biggest legacy, according to the source, was just making parallel worlds a concept people understood on TV, that episodic, week-by-week exploration.
And you really do see that everywhere now, don't you? The sources list shows set entirely in other realities, like Men in the High Castle, For All Mankind.
Or shows built around the idea, like Fringe, and then the big ones.
Oh, yeah. The Arrowverse shows on the CW Flash. Legends, they went all in on the multiverse.
And the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe now. The Multiverse saga. Loki. It feels like a direct line from Sliders making that idea accessible.
The article even floats the idea maybe it's time for a Sliders reboot now that everyone gets the multiverse concept.
Huh. Interesting thought. Would it work differently today?
Maybe. Okay, next show. Number 2 is Farscape. This one started right at the end of the decade, 99.
Yeah, ran into the early 2000s. It starts with John Crichton, an American astronaut, getting flung way across the universe.
And he ends up with this crew, but the source says it's not like Star Trek or Stargate.
No, not at all. It's described as a ragtag group of alien fugitives. Everyone's got their own agenda, their own backstory. It's messy.
The article calls it beautiful, but also bonkers, pushing boundaries, being intelligent and as weird as possible.
And a comment you shared really echoed that, calling it a whole new sci-fi, Star Trek-ish concept and saying they did a fantastic job with it. It captured that unique feel.
That bonkers quality sees key. The sources mentioned it felt kind of millennial, like Futurama or The Fifth Element.
Right, that kind of energy. But then it also had these Henson creature shop puppets, which feels more like an 80s thing.
Totally. That mix was part of its groundbreaking weirdness, as the article puts it.
And you can trace its influence. The sources point to shows like Dark Matter, Killjoys, character-driven space stories.
And movies, too.
Yeah, James Gunn, who did Guardians of the Galaxy, apparently loves Farscape. He cited it, mentioned character parallels between the two.
Makes sense. Now, that same commenter who liked it also mentioned it got better with longer stories, but was mad it got canceled on a cliffhanger.
Ah, the dreaded cliffhanger cancellation. But they were happy it got redeemed by a miniseries later, which, points to that rise of wanting more connected storytelling.
Definitely. Okay, let's rewind a bit chronologically. Third on the list, Quantum Leap. Ran 1989 to 93.
Oh, yeah, such a unique concept. Dr. Sam Beckett time travels, but into other people's bodies within his own lifetime.
And the goal each week wasn't like saving the world. It was about him being an agent of change for the better in that person's specific life.
Exactly. The sources really emphasized that it used time travel to tell these very personal, small-scale stories about ordinary people. It didn't necessarily need some huge, complex mystery driving it week to week.
So the appeal was more human. The article says it drew an adult audience with nostalgia, empathy, and that weekly procedural puzzle. What's Sam got to fix this time?
And it just had a lot of heart. The source calls it a show about creating positive change through small actions, all driven by Sam's belief in people's basic goodness.
That lighter touch, focusing on ordinary folks through an extraordinary lens.
Yeah.
You see echoes of that, right?
The article suggests maybe in the tone of The Good Place, that mix of humor and heart, and maybe Resident Alien with the whole seeing humans through an outsider's eyes thing, someone not in their own body.
Right, right. The source also touches on the recent revival, with Raymond Lee trying to bring Sam back. Only lasted 2 seasons, though.
Yeah, and it seems like the legacy of that original ending really hangs heavy for fans.
Oh, for sure. One comment you shared just lays it out, loving the show but being heartbroken and pissed that the final title card said Sam never made it home.
That ending is, it's iconic in its own way. And, interestingly, that comment section also brought up the whole copy debate again. Someone else claimed Quantum Leap was just a copy of the time tunnel.
See, there it is again. This idea of influence versus imitation keeps popping up.
It does, and that kind of leads us perfectly into the next one, which is a giant of 90s sci-fi TV, according to these sources, Star Trek, The Next Generation.
Okay, TNG. Ran 87 to 94, so it overlaps the decades. But it really anchored what the sources call that Star Trek golden age in the 90s, set the stage for Deep Space Nine and Voyager.
Yeah, the article really stresses how it blew the Trek universe wide open. New species, new tech, new kinds of problems for the crew to solve. It wasn't just retreading the original series.
Which was a risk at first, right? Moving on from Kirk and Spock. But the sources say it totally reignited interest for a whole new audience.
Absolutely. And it proved you could successfully revive or reimagine these older sci-fi franchises. Think about the Battlestar Galactica reboot later, or Doctor Who's return. TNG showed it could work.
And that core format, the ship, the exploration, tackling moral dilemmas each week.
That tried and true format, as the source calls it, got picked up by others. You had Stargate SG-1, Sequest DSV, basically taking that Trek formula and putting their own spin on the world building.
And you see its shadow even in things that aren't direct copies, but more like homages or critiques. The article mentions Galaxy Quest, obviously.
Obviously. And the Orville, which the source basically calls a 21st century TNG. Even that Black Mirror episode, USS Callister.
Right, using the Trek aesthetic to say something else entirely. The love for TNG really comes through in the comments, too. One person just says, oh, hell, who didn't love NG? Talks about watching the pilot, still watching reruns.
That kind of lasting affection really says something about its impact, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, we mentioned serialization earlier with Farscape, but there's one show on this list the sources pinpoint as being way ahead of the curve there, Babylon 5.
Ah, yes, B5. J. Michael Straczynski's show ran 93 to 98. The article flat out says it was so far ahead of its time. It feels more like the streaming shows we watch now than what was on TV back then, both in format and its pioneering CGI.
Straczynski, or JMS, had this grand plan, right? The source calls it a thoughtfully crafted novel for television. He mapped out 5 seasons from the get-go.
Which is totally normal now, but back then. The article says deep serialization like that was a hard sell. Episodic TV was still king.
And it almost didn't make it, didn't it? The sources mentioned it nearly got canceled but was saved by TNT.
Right. TNT picked it up for season 5 and aired the reruns daily, which really helped build its audience. So that format risk paid off, eventually.
But it wasn't just the format, it was the themes, too. The article highlights how daring it was. It showed humans in the future still dealing with, well, our own baggage.
Yeah, prejudice, politics, religion, interstellar racism. It was all baked into the story of this space station trying to keep the peace between all these different species. It wasn't easy.
The source notes that cooperation in B5's universe was difficult to actually attain without real work. You hear it in that opening monologue, right? Our last, best hope for peace.
Exactly. Now, this is where the comments get really interesting again, especially on that copying theme. One comment is super blunt. Babylon 5. Horrid copy of Star Trek. Never watched.
Wow, okay. Dismissive. But then there's another comment that goes deep defending it, specifically against the idea it copied Star Trek, Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, and this commenter brings up some history detailed in the sources. Apparently, JMS pitched B5, his whole concept, 5-year arc, space station setting to Paramount, the Star Trek studio, way back in 1989.
And Paramount passed.
Thought a show mostly on a station will be boring, according to the comment, drawing on the source material. Then, a few years later, after B5 got the green light elsewhere, Paramount announces DS9.
Which was also set on a space station, with longer story arcs starting to creep in.
Right. The comment acknowledges the similarities people saw setting, some character types, serialized elements. But it also mentions JMS himself doesn't believe Paramount intentionally ripped him off, just that the timing was interesting.
And the comment adds the point that both shows were probably drawing on similar sci-fi ideas floating around at the time anyway.
Which feels fair. And what's cool is the commenter says they're proud to be a fan of both shows. Like, there's room for both. They even list JMS's awards, Hugo's, Saturn's, Eisner's, kind of bolstering his credentials.
That's a really insightful comment, adding a lot of context.
Okay.
That brings us to the last show on the article's list, and this is the one they call potentially the most influential of the 90s.
The X-Files. Ran 93 to 2002. The source just says its DNA is scattered throughout modern television. High praise.
It's built around that iconic duo, right?
Yeah.
Mulder the believer, Scully the skeptic, FBI agents looking into the weird stuff. The article says it perfectly married procedural drama and spooky science fiction.
And it nailed that structure. You had the standalone Monster of the Week episodes, which were great entry points.
Right, you could just jump in.
But then you also had the ongoing mythology episodes, slowly dripping out clues about the big alien conspiracy. The source calls it an early mystery box show because of that.
And Chris Carter, the creator, his whole method of using these cryptic clues, keeping the audience guessing, that became hugely influential.
Oh, yeah. The article points directly to J.J. Abrams' shows like Lost and Fringe as being inspired by that. And since Lost had so many imitators...
They're all descendants of the X-Files in a way.
Wow. And you see its influence, too, in shows that play with folklore, urban legends, the whole truth is hidden vibe, like supernatural, grim.
Even Stranger Things on Netflix feels like it owes a debt there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the comments about X-Files, intense. One just declares best show ever.
Huh? Can't get much clearer than that.
Another one mentions loving it, especially Gillian Anderson as Scully, and the whole alien cover-up plot. They even add they believe aliens are real, and of course, the truth's out there.
That tagline just captured it perfectly, didn't it? And sticking with the theme, there's another comment claiming X-Files was a copy of The Night Stalker from the 70s.
Right, and they even point out that Darren McGavin, the star of Night Stalker, actually guest starred on The X-Files later. It's like people are constantly drawing these lines of connection.
Which really brings us back to that core question these sources raise, what is influence versus imitation? But looking at all six.
Yeah, pulling it all together, the sources make a really strong case that these shows weren't just popular, they fundamentally changed TV.
Things we just expect now. Like making really complex ideas, like the multiverse and sliders, accessible.
Or serialized storytelling becoming the norm, not the exception. Thanks to Babylon 5, X-Files, even Farscape's arcs.
Tackling tougher themes, politics, prejudice, faith in genre shows like B5 and X-Files did.
Blending genres, procedural and sci-fi, horror and mystery like X-Files and Quantum Leap. Pushing TV effects forward with CGI like B5, or creature work like Farscape.
And just proving you could successfully update the classics, like TNG did for Star Trek.
Exactly. The argument from these sources is pretty clear. These shows laid the groundwork for so much of the television landscape we have today. They weren't just shows, they were shapers.
It's definitely clear from the article, and especially from the passion in those comments, that this era really resonated and continues to resonate. This is a great deep dive using these sources to explore why.
Yeah, thanks for bringing these sources to the table. Having the analysis from the article alongside those first-hand fan reactions gives such a rounded perspective.
It really does. So that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. We saw it come up again and again in the comments, people calling shows like B5 or X-Files or Quantum Leap copies of earlier things. So think about this. How do you draw the line between a show being influenced by what came before and just imitating it? And what does that distinction maybe tell us about how creativity works and how genres like sci-fi evolve over time?